Welcome into another edition of New Track Record Podcast from the DWELT studios. Caleb Hatch and Justin Kinney with you. And what a week it has been, and not talking IndyCar.
No, you have had quite the week. And
yeah.
Congratulations are in order, Pops.
Yes. So my wife had a baby. It was 10 weeks early. He was 10 weeks early, but little Theodore is in the NICU, so it has been a crazy week. Last week we went in for a routine appointment, and he was measuring really small, and then went to another doctor, and then a couple days later, boom, we're in the hospital.
It's time to get him out of there.
Surgery, a C-section surgery, so here we are. But so he'll be in the NICU for a bit, and our recording schedule will probably be a little all over the place moving forward, but we'll keep bringing you episodes, and hopefully we'll obviously recap the Ontario Honda Dealers Indy from last weekend. But then moving forward, I mean, it's the Olympic break, but I also feel like it's going to be full of silly season news.
I would imagine the next couple of weeks we get. I would be surprised if we don't have some Prima news by the time we get back racing again. So yes, I think there's going to be some seats settled, maybe some seats open that we've heard could be rumored to be open. There's some confirmation with that. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of stuff to talk about over the next couple of weeks, other than little Teddy.
True. And Teddy, not Theo.
No Theo. Sorry, Mr. Pourchaire. No Theo or Tio or whatever it is. They pronounce it in France, but sorry, Mr. Pourchaire. We're going Theodore or Teddy.
Yes. So with that, let's talk about the Ontario Honda Dealers Indy Toronto. And I did watch this race live, actually, in the hospital.
Well, you said without sound, right?
Mostly without sound.
But then you went back and watched it. But
I went back and tried to watch it again. Most of it again, also without sound. I watched some of it in the middle of the night last night because I didn't really feel like I caught everything that happened. And I still don't feel like I caught everything that happened. So obviously I'll lean on you to really tell me what happened in this race, because I watch it 2 or 3 times and I feel like I miss something every time. But Colton Herta, I did not miss this. Colton Herta was dominant. Led every practice session, practice 1, practice 2, obviously won pole, led the warm-up as well, and then dominated in the race. Andretti, great street package. That's not a surprise, and it finally clicked for them this year. I mean, Herta's had some good runs at other street courses, Long Beach in particular, but they finally put it all together, and they get their first team win. Colton Herta breaks, a 41-race winless streak? And you got to remember, he's had, like half a dozen poles during that time frame? Yeah, so it's not like he hasn't had cars to win. Right. It just hasn't come together, whether it's bad luck, whether it's him making mistakes, whether it's bad strategy. But it finally came together, and it came together in a dominant fashion the entire weekend.
It did. I think it was the first win for Herta on pole in 7 races. So he went 6 races being on pole without winning. It was a dominant performance for Colton Herta. Much needed, as you mentioned, for him, for the team. The fact that Kyle Kirkwood was behind him the entire time, I think, took some drama out of it, because teammates, they weren't going to do anything, particularly Kirkwood, to jeopardize either one of their races. So every restart, it seemed like Kyle Kirkwood was holding back a little bit. He wasn't going to make any silly moves to try to get by Colton Herta. I wonder how exciting this race could have been on restarts if there was not a teammate right behind Colton Herta. But that doesn't take away the fact that Herta, a splendid drive, no mistakes by him, no mistakes by the team, dominated the weekend, and a much-needed dub heading in to the Olympics break for both Andretti and Colton Herta.
So we look at Colton Herta, obviously, I think, let's just combine this, because I think our first takeaway is Colton Herta getting back to victory lane, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, totally.
So we'll combine this, but you look at Herta's street course results this year. So 3rd at St. Pete, after all the chaos post-race with Penske. So he gets a podium there. 2nd at Long Beach, had a chance, was chasing down Dixon at the end. Somehow Dixon, doing Dixon things, wins that race. 19th at Detroit, but remember, he won the pole, was very much in contention until he made a mistake. And then obviously winning at Toronto in dominant fashion. So once again, he's solid on street courses. Kyle Kirkwood, not as solid as he was last year, but still a 10th at St. Pete. He was 7th at Long Beach. Then at Detroit, he was 4th, and then 2nd at Toronto. I mean, this team has these street circuits figured out in terms of unloading off the truck and being fast. And for Colton Herta, it's just, this was a culmination of everything finally coming together. So I think for me, I think this helps him moving forward the rest of the season. It won't shock me to see him win another race this year.
No, I agree, and maybe it opens the door to some equally good performances and winning races, and that goes across the entire team, pit lane, engineering, strategy, all that stuff, not just the driver. And you wonder if every time Andretti gets a win, you're thinking, okay, could this be the catalyst to really propel them into multiple wins? Can Kyle Kirkwood now get a win? You wonder. It's just a feel-good weekend for a team that we have been openly critical about in terms of lack of execution and lack of performance, and the ability for them to do it at Toronto alleviated some of those concerns temporarily, but it also showed, too, what this team is capable of when it has everything working for it in terms of limiting mistakes and not having strategy bad calls and drivers not making bad moves. And these two guys are clearly the leaders of Andretti Autosport, Herta and Kirkwood. They drove like it last Sunday.
And you look at it this way, Colton Herta once again has put himself on the fringe of the championship. Yes, he's 4th, and it's going to take an Alex Palou mistake for anyone to get back into this. We're going to have to see Iowa race 1 part 2, right, where Palou makes a mistake or has some issue, whether it's mechanical or a crash or whatever, because he has 2 finishes outside the top 15 this season, and a 3rd would very much open up the title chase. But at least Colton Herta is staying on the fringes, and he's had stretches this year where you thought you're not maximizing what you have in front of you. I mean, you look at Detroit and Indy and Road America in particular as being those events where you thought, okay, surely he's going to win one of those, and he did not, even though he had 3 race-winning cars. But again, this gives him that chance. That's all you can ask with, 5 races left, is an opportunity to be there, and he's there.
Definitely is. And at least coming along late in the season, too, would be a good charge. Regardless if he wins the championship or not, would be good momentum for Colton Herta in an otherwise fairly frustrating year and a half, 2 years. And maybe this can be finally turning the page after those struggles, the 40-plus race losing streak, you could say, or winless streak. So we'll see if it materializes into something bigger for Andretti Autosport and Colton Herta in particular, but it was a very good weekend north of the border for them.
Well, and you look at Herta's season, he was knocking on the door several times, and this is a lot better compared to his previous 2 seasons where,
yes,
he's not competing for poles, competing for wins as much. And he and Pato O'Ward have been really strong this season. They just haven't quite been as consistent as Palou and Power and Dixon.
Well, and that keeps that's the difference, right, between Penske and Ganassi and Andretti and McLaren, is those top 2 teams make less mistakes, whether it's drivers. We'll talk about Penske in a minute in terms of mistakes. They had quite the lap at Toronto. But overall, you look at Penske and particularly Ganassi the last couple of years is being able to avoid those mistakes, avoid grid penalties. We'll talk about Ganassi, too, and turning an otherwise subpar qualifying performance into a very good finishing result for the team. And that's the level of consistency that Andretti and McLaren need to find. And we don't expect Andretti to go on this big, long winning streak, but at the same time, performances like Toronto show they can do it. They just need to prove that they can do it at a majority of tracks. And that's what's keeping their drivers and their team away from championship contention compared to Penske and Ganassi year over year.
Yeah, absolutely. And for Herta, dominance like this, 81 of 85 laps. Now, they said on the broadcast, and they've written it, but I've seen people kind of pick it apart, and that was he was the first driver in IndyCar history to lead every session and win the race. My guess is that's an
accurate, right?
IndyCar IRL era stat.
Right.
not
a hard time thinking that AJ Foyt didn't do it at
or Mario
in 1964, right? I mean, just and I don't even know, were they even having multiple practices back then at races? I'm sure somebody came at some point in the 60s, 70s, 50s, 80s, who knows, that led a practice, qualified on pole, and won a race. I have a hard time. I mean, I think, I agree that at least it's starting with the IRL era, maybe actually, consolidation era. I don't know. It just seemed like kind of a stretch to think that's the first time that's ever happened in 70 years of racing.
Maybe they mean with the current setup of 2 practices, qualifying, a warm-up in the race.
Which I can buy.
I buy that. But again, it's so confusing because sometimes you see IRL era plus unification stats thrown out. Sometimes you see kart plus IRL plus unification.
Right.
And sometimes you see everything before
Open
that.
wheel history.
Yeah. So it's hard to know, I think, what the stats mean. And I'm sure someone will correct us on this after we post the episode. Please do, by the way.
Yeah, please show us tangible evidence this is the first time it's ever happened. Or if you have tangible evidence this is the first time it didn't, let us know.
Yes, absolutely. So what is your next takeaway?
Well, let's talk Penske because I teased them, and I'm not going to pick apart their standings for the season because I think some people want to say, well, it's an un-Penske-like season, and they're pretty comparable to what they were last year. I think it's a very un-Joseph Newgarden season, but it was almost like a microcosm, that one lap or two at Toronto of their entire season. I mean, mistakes by Joseph Newgarden, and then just some over-aggression with teammates, with Will Power getting into Scott McLaughlin. And I was hoping the double birds would come out and reciprocate what of course, is still a magical moment at New Hampshire for Will Power. Instead, it was just clapping for Scott McLaughlin, but it did show maybe some angst between drivers in terms of making that move. It was setting up to be another decent day for Penske, and it was un-Penske-like. And it was un-Penske-like for Power and McLaughlin, but it was very much Joseph Newgarden-like for really since Indy.
Yes. I mean, yes, he had the good run at Iowa. He was solid, but not dominant like people expected. And then he did have the good run at Road America. But this season is what it is. It's up and down, and it's full of mistakes. And he basically went offline, lost spots. And then didn't he also have a pit stop issue as well late in the race?
I don't know if he stalled. Well, no, he
a wheel wasn't on.
Issue. Yeah, it's a wheel issue. So it's just been. And this was interesting, too, is I can't remember who mentioned it. Maybe it was even Charlie Kimball. I can't exactly remember, but saying that if Joseph Newgarden isn't the fastest Penske on a weekend, it puts him in a sour mood. And that's
yes.
the jump. And it's just
Kimball did say that.
And it's like his level of expectation is high, and that's good. But unless you're Max Verstappen, okay, you're never going to have the better car, the best car every weekend within the team. That's just how it is. And I think there's a level of, I don't know, like Joseph Newgarden's expectations border on unrealistic sometimes within the team. I don't know if it's, hey, I've won the last 2 Indy 500s. I should have this, that, and the other in terms of stuff. I don't know, but I think his expectations border on unrealistic for me. And I don't think that was always the case with Joseph Newgarden. And then when he doesn't have that, he pushes. And I think it's the angst and the anger that he's not at the front, or he's not the top Penske car in race trim or whatever. And then he tends to make mistakes.
He's overdriving the car. And
putting simply, yes, he's overdriving the car.
And I think the other thing is, how badly he wants to win that 3rd championship. Look, he hasn't won a title since 2019. Oh, he's been a contender several years since then. That's not been the issue. But this year, it feels like the wheels have fallen off, and it's crazy because, like you mentioned, back-to-back Indy 500, so he still has that feather in his cap. I guess you could say second feather in his cap. But outside of that, the season is just been so mistake-prone because I think he's simply overdriving the car to try to get to where he thinks he should be.
at this point, and I think this is fair to say, is Joseph Newgarden has become a better driver at Indianapolis and a worse driver season-wide. Right now, he's sitting in 8th place in points. If that holds, it will be the worst finish for him in the points since 2014, when he was 13th.
And that was with what? Carpenter, Fisher, Hartman?
That was still Sarah Fisher Hartman.
Sarah Fisher Hartman.
The year after went CFH, where he finished 7th. The year after he was at Carpenter, finished 4th before he made the move to Penske. But for a guy that has won 2 championships, and even since winning the championship, finished 3rd twice, it's just been an absolutely terrible season. And the more he goes with struggles, it seems the more undisciplined he becomes on track, and I think within the team.
Well, and you look at what he's done. So he had 3 straight second-place finishes after winning his second title in 2019. He was 5th last season. He won 9 races the previous 2 seasons combined. It's not like he's not winning. He has 1 win this year, and he is quite honestly struggled. And you just wonder, how much is it a mental aspect compared to, it's not a talent issue, right? I think it's just all mental.
Maybe it wasn't the best idea to seemingly shut himself off from everybody. Remember, that was the big story going into St. Pete.
Yeah, and how's that work?
Yeah, how's that worked out? Other than the Indianapolis 500, which we're clearly saying that is the apex of the sport, okay? Winning an Indy 500, nothing else matters. But that said, it does matter to Joseph Newgarden. It almost matters too much to Joseph Newgarden because he continues to drive more and more undisciplined, in my opinion, and I think he's becoming more and more unhinged within the team. And I wonder if there's a sit down coming with Joseph Newgarden in the offseason. Like, dude, you got to calm down. You got to relax. You got to chill. Like, I don't know how he gets back to that happy-go-lucky, laid-back Joseph Newgarden. And maybe to him, he's like, hey, that Joseph Newgarden never won an Indianapolis 500, but that Joseph Newgarden won championships. So where can you find that middle ground where you can do both?
Well, he's almost gone reverse Will Power, where Power before, was feisty and angry and kind of had an attitude. And then Power changed kind of how he approaches things, wins his second championship. And yes, he's not winning as much as he used to, but he won that second championship. And that's a big boost to a resume for a career. And Power's certainly one of the greatest and still continues to win pole positions, even though he is yet to win a pole this year, which is wild.
Mm-hmm. I think, too, with Joseph Newgarden is the more he tries to not show his emotions to the media and public and try to be this camera on Joseph Newgarden.
It's like an alternate persona.
Yeah, it's like an alter ego. It used to be the Joseph Newgarden you got in the media was the Joseph Newgarden that we hear was in the paddock. That's not the case anymore. You have 2 distinctly different Joseph Newgardens, and right now neither one of them is finding success outside of Indy. But I really seriously think that in the offseason there is a very much come to Jesus type meeting with Joseph Newgarden. It's like, dude, you have to find a place mentally where you're the best you can be and you're the best for the team, because right now he isn't.
It has been a struggle indeed. Let's get to my number 2, and I mean, we got to talk about race control, right? And the Pato Award spin, which we haven't even mentioned the fact that because of Penske's mistakes late in this race and Pato Award spin, Alex Blow just gets a free pass to an easy top 5, where he was struggling to make anything happen in the first stint, and then he's hovering around the top 10, and then suddenly he finishes 4th. I mean, this is how championships are won. But nonetheless, Pato Award spins in front of Alex Palou. Palou able to avoid it. There's a lot of luck in winning a championship. Palou had it right there. Then there's the delay, and I watched it a second time. It's about 4.5 seconds, right, between Pato Award's spin and then between when the yellow's called. But in that 4.5 seconds, Ericsson hits Award in the wall. And then you have all the chaos with Pietro Fittipaldi and Santino Ferrucci flying through the air. Nice highlight for IndyCar on the videos, I guess, but this seemed pretty avoidable in my opinion. And is it that IndyCar is trusting the hybrid ability for cars to restart so quickly? And so they just thought, oh, he can get out of a spin because there wasn't contact. This wasn't like a Rossi situation, right, over the weekend where he broke his thumb. Kiffin Simpson basically had almost the exact same crash during the race before all the chaos. Is it that IndyCar's trusting that drivers can get out of a spin? Is it that this was just a perfect storm between, a local yellow and then everything happening just after Nolan Siegel, I believe, drove by and he wouldn't have caught the yellow flag from the marshal? What do we blame here?
Well, I think it was a perfect storm of a lot of different things in terms of where it happened, in terms of not being having the blind corner, so drivers can't see. I think it was at a place where IndyCar, I think, could do better, and this maybe goes overall, is IndyCar needs to do better, and we've said this before for different reasons, at throwing yellows. And they have this automated system that they've been hyping up.
Yeah, the electronic marshalling system.
Correct.
Right?
That would have been, this is a perfect scenario of why you have this, because flagmen can't be every 500 feet on a track. That's just not realistic. So you have this electronic system to immediately throw yellow and it show up on everybody's steering wheel. And that wasn't done. And I feel like the marshals sometimes get too cute. We've seen it, of course, keeping it green so the leaders can pit, right, and everything like that.
But I would say that's a race control thing.
Yeah, but it's just like, and maybe it's a race control thing with this too. Is like, okay, well, there's only one car in the wall, but I think also sometimes I don't think IndyCar, quite frankly, has the infrastructure at some of these road and street courses to be able to see the entire track all the time.
Well, and you also have to keep in mind, corner workers at tracks, whether it's a road course, a street course, these are volunteers.
Yeah, I mean, what are they supposed to? They're not in charge of throwing a yellow.
Usually with their local SCCA, they're volunteers, and they get some perks out of it, obviously. But IndyCar and a lot of motorsport series rely on these corner workers as volunteers to do this, and maybe IndyCar changes. I'm not saying you get rid of the volunteers. That's not what I'm saying, but maybe you add more spots for the digital signboards. Yeah. Maybe you change where they're placed for next year.
Well, maybe too is maybe IndyCar needs a dedicated crew of 10 to 15 flagmen around a track, and they just travel with the series. And every road and street courses, you have the same guys or girls working. So they're quote unquote professional at this. They're not volunteers. They're not people you find on site. These are experienced folks that when they throw a yellow, it is legit and it is then thrown for the entire course, for the entire series.
Look, this isn't the first time we've complained about how this situation has worked. So and
inevitably this is going to happen at particularly street courses where I just think IndyCar could do a better job being on top of every corner and every potential bottleneck spot on a street course. Because that's where we see the majority of these issues, right? Because there's no runoff like you have on road courses. So I think IndyCar just pure and simple needs to do a better job at manning, with males and females, these flag spots across the track, and then also using the technology that they have as well. If a car, this should be the rule, if a car gets sideways and stopped on track on a street course, the yellow throws immediately. And I think IndyCar would do that, but maybe they just don't have the infrastructure to see everything at all times, which is bad. You need to be able to see everything at all times. They can't be waiting for the NBC feed, right, to throw some things in different spots of the track. So this needs figured out. This time, while it resulted in some wrecked cars for sure, there were no injuries. But you're playing with fire.
A lot of damage and a high parts bill.
Yes, you're playing with fire with this. You need to throw yellows ASAP. And once again, that didn't happen for IndyCar.
Especially on a street course where there's zero runoff. That's the biggest issue.
That's the biggest thing. Road courses where there's plenty of runoff, that's fine. You can go around it. There's no going around it at some street courses, unless you're Graham Rahal and you just back up and go through
go reverse like he did last year.
Go in reverse and go through the whatever that thing is. I always forget the Prince something.
Whatever Gates.
Yeah.
Yes.
Prince Charles Gate. I don't know.
No, I think Prince Edward.
Yeah, that sounds right. Prince Edward.
Pato O'Ward had plenty to say over the weekend. He was upset over qualifying. Said absolute effing joke. He did edit himself on that with qualifying because he got held up, right?
Well, it's the typical issues on a street course, right? 27 cars, or when you split it in half, 13 and 14 cars, and over a 2 mile. I mean, it's not a very big street course, so
1.786 miles.
Oh my gosh, it's even smaller than I thought. That's not a lot of room. So here's a potential thing, and maybe IndyCar looks at it. Why not have 3 groups of 9?
And go 8 minutes instead of 10.
Go 8 minutes each, and then you advance the top, I don't know,
top 5
into the second round.
I feel like they're due for a qualifying changeup just because of the number of entries. Something we'll talk about later this episode. Pato O'Ward also had this to say on social media after the crash. He said, "Thankful for the aero screen, or else I wouldn't be writing this right now." That is true. Sorry to my team and all involved by no fault of their own. As for the incident, maybe next time at least throw a local yellow when a car is in the most dangerous spot possible. IndyCar, just a thought.
But when you're manning these corners with guys that are coming out for the weekend, it's tough to put the burden on them. Not saying that Pato is. I think the series needs called out for utilizing those guys and putting a lot of pressure on them on what to do.
Yes, for sure. Who's up? I'm not even sure what number
I think it's
we're
my
on.
third one.
Your third?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you mentioned Scott Dixon. Let's talk about Ganassi in general. And you look at where they started, particularly the top 3 guys, the top 3 finishers. You had Dixon 15th. You had Alex Palou 18th, and Marcus Armstrong 13th. And going into the race, you felt, well, if Alex Palou has another subpar race like he did at Iowa 1, maybe something could happen and spice up the championship race. Instead, we see Scott Dixon finish 3rd, Alex Palou finish 4th, and a really good performance for Marcus Armstrong, who I think could be a guy on the chopping block at Ganassi, and maybe that's just me. But Ganassi figures it out. We talk about Andretti and McLaren not figuring it out enough. Ganassi shows, once again, subpar qualifying effort. They end up taking 3 of the top 5 spots.
And remember, Chip Ganassi called this the worst qualifying performance in team history.
Woo! That's saying something.
Now, and he wasn't bashing his team. It was just a matter of fact. This was bad. We'll fix it on race day, and of course they did.
Right?
That's what they do. That's what the great teams do. Here's my takeaway. If there was any window of opportunity in the championship, it was this race, and everyone else really failed to capitalize outside of, I would say, Herta, because he won and obviously gained, 20-some points to make something happen in this, 22 points. But everyone else, pretty much it's a lost cause, and unless Herta's going to win 2 more races in these final 5, he's not going to win the title either. This was the chance, I feel like.
Right. Just
like you had Iowa 1, felt like an opportunity, and then Iowa 2 happened and Palou got 2nd. You're running out of chances.
And when you're relying on the guy you're chasing to have bad days as the key to anybody else winning the championship, that's not the best strategy. That's where Alex Palou is. That's where the contenders are. And you go now with the 4 of the final 5 races at ovals, where Alex Palou, he hasn't piled up the dubs at ovals, but there's less, I think, unpredictability than you would have on street courses. We saw what happened at Iowa 1, but you're going to need a lot of luck on 4 ovals, 4 oval races to have a shot to beat Alex Palou. It's not as much performances of others drivers as it is the lack of performance for Alex Palou. And anytime people have relied on that happening, it hasn't happened because Alex Palou delivers. I just have a hard time buying into Alex Palou is going to hit this stretch where he's really struggling and somebody's going to jump him.
All right, for my final point, this is going to be a little different. I want to highlight basically everyone 5th through 10th in this race because you had Marcus Armstrong get 5th, a really solid result for him on the season. tying his second best result. He was fifth at fifth. Well, he's fifth at Thermal, but fifth in the Indy GP. Was third at Detroit. It's a huge boost for a driver who had struggled really the 4 out of the last 5 races, and a guy who's obviously trying to battle to keep a ride. Then you have David Malukas, 6th. I believe that is his best result on the young season. And obviously huge for Meyer Shank in getting the 66 in the leader circle, and I believe it now is. In 7th, you have Christian Lundgaard getting a result. Yes, he won this race last year, but he hasn't really had a great season. And this was his best result since Mid-Ohio and gets him back on the fringes of the top 10 in points. He's in 11th. Then you go on to 8th and Rinus VeeKay, and I believe that is his 3rd straight top 10, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, so. 3rd straight top 10. One of those was a 5th in the first Iowa race. Obviously a huge boost. He's 15th in points now. He has struggled this season. That's been big. Romain Grosjean in 9th. Again, continuing to put together some good results. 16th in points, back-to-back top 10s. Graham Rahal in 10th. With the fastest steering wheel change I have ever seen. That was one of the most impressive things of the race.
Now, it didn't work to fix the problem, but it was still pretty cool.
And he still came in 10th because, Toronto's usually a race with a lot of carnage. Well, and that's what happened.
12 cars finishing the lead lap.
Yeah. But, hey, if you're there at the end and you avoid the carnage, props to you. And I just want to give credit to all those drivers because all of those results in particular mean something to either those drivers or also those teams as we close out the season.
Well, Malukas continuing to prove himself with that 6th, as you mentioned. Christian Lundgaard getting it, of course, set to go to McLaren for next year. Graham Rahal getting that top 10, I think, was huge. And, in a race that had a lot of contact. Half the field didn't even finish. And for those guys to get those results were big, particularly going into the break. You don't want a smashed up race car and finishing in the back heading into the break. It's just not good vibes. But for every driver in the top 10, they definitely earned it in Toronto.
Yes. Oh, for sure. And honorable mentions, obviously Teo Pourchaire coming over and filling in for Alexander Rossi, who broke his right thumb. He had surgery. The cast is off. They're still targeting a return for Gateway. We'll see if that happens. But
hadn't they fixed that? Remember that was an issue several years ago. The steering wheel whipping back when.
Yes,
I thought they had fixed that, but
I think the fix was drivers just taking their hands off the steering wheel.
Rossi kept thinking he could save it and then couldn't, and then whipped his hand over and hurt his thumb. But good job on Teo Pourchaire because he finished 14th and he had never driven that course. Obviously, did he get practice 2?
He got
or just qualifying.
I don't think he got practice 2.
So very impressive for what Teo Pourchaire was able to do, and props to Toby Sowery too.
Yes.
1 lap down, I think he finished. So. Some good performances coming out of Toronto for various drivers.
And how about Honda, top 7?
How about that? Not bad at a Honda-sponsored event.
It's always good when you can do that at one of your own events because, well, they needed a boost, and this was obviously a huge boost for them. Some other stats and notes out of this race. Colton Herta, so in his career, this is from Nathan Brown, the Indy Star, Colton Herta, 14 poles now. In his career, and this is wild to me, but at 24 years old, 14 career poles, Nathan Brown saying, at the same age, Will Power, who has 70 career poles, 71 if you include Surfer's 2008 exhibition race, let's not forget, Power hadn't recorded a single IndyCar start yet.
Well, Colton Herta's got a ways to go to be Will Power. I know he's trending in the right direction, but Will Power eventually joined Team Penske and really took off. Will Colton Herta ever join Team Penske?
It's a great question. Also, Pato Award spotter passed away leading into the weekend. Bob Jeffrey, a longtime spotter in motorsports. They had a special sticker, I believe, on Pato's helmet. So obviously a tough weekend for McLaren when you lose a spotter. Rossi gets a broken thumb. He's out. You have to get a fill-in driver who ends up being Pourchaire. Full circle moment.
Just bizarre.
We'll have a great tweet and tweets of the week on that.
Well, after some consternation earlier in the week about how it all went down, and
well, yeah, a blog like European blog basically claiming that some things, and there was a back and forth. Pourchaire denied some of the stuff in that article, and then that article was taken down. And then Tony Kanaan kind of had a back and forth, and people were like, what is this all about? Well, it turns out Pourchaire gets a ride.
With the
That's
team
what it's all about.
Supposedly, there was a horrible relationship with, and it's just weird how motorsports works for sure. How about Toronto in general? Because the last, even a couple years ago, we looked at Toronto as, okay, the expansion around Exhibition Place, and is this this event going to survive? First time, or just the second time, I think, in the event's history that there was not a Canadian driver in the starting field, and very, very healthy, vibrant crowd, I thought. I just feel like Toronto is on as good a ground as it has been in the last 5 or 6 years.
I would agree. I think they need to add more grandstands. That's the thing I'm like, these stands are packed. Add more stands, because you're looking at the crowd and the stands are packed, but in reality is what, 15, 20,000 on race day?
Yeah, I don't know if it's lack of space to put those. I know that's kind of been the issue with all the development around Exhibition Place and stuff like that. So, but I do. It seems like the event, once again, a very, very well attended, and I just. It's unfortunate in the States. It's on Peacock. It is what it is. But I with every passing year, it feels like Toronto feels less and less of a race in jeopardy.
It felt like it was on life support due to the pandemic, and it's
Absolutely.
really come back strong. And we'll likely have a Canadian driver. Who knows? Maybe more next year. We'll get to details on that in news and notes.
All right. Good tease.
Yes, for sure. All right, if you agree or disagree with us on our takes on Toronto, let us know. You can find us, newtrackrecordpodcast.com. That's the website. While you're there, you can sign up for the email list so you won't miss an episode or special announcements. It's free to subscribe. You can also check out the store. We have T-shirts and stickers for sale for you on there. You can follow us on social media, IndyCar Podcast, Instagram, IndyCar Podcast on Twitter /X, on Facebook. Just search for New Track Record. And then you can email us, newtrackrecordpodcast@gmail.com, and send your thoughts that way. And also support us via Patreon, patreon.com/newtrackrecord, starting at just $1 per month. There are some higher tiers. You get perks, like you'll get a sticker at the $5 a month level. You'll get a T-shirt thrown in at the $10 a month level. So you can check that out. Again, patreon.com/newtrackrecord. And as always, you can listen and download for free on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Cast, Overcast, Castbox, YouTube Music, basically wherever you find your podcasts, and listen in for free. Okay, mailbag time, Justin. And we start with Rate the Race. We had a lot of responses. As always, I've averaged them out. How would you rate the race this time at Toronto?
I have it as a 7.
As do I.
Oh, really?
I thought you were going to go 7.5.
Well, I did initially, and then I let it settle a little bit and felt like, well, with the lack of much drama up front, and kind of took a little bit away from it. But I did think, the unpredictability of a road or a street course, combined with the unpredictability of Andretti Global at the front, felt like it was an engaging, complete race with 85 laps. A lot of strategy, a lot of differing strategies. I mean, Scott McLaughlin, his opening stint decision with tires was a little puzzling. And it seemingly he had recovered from that before the issue with Will Power. And I think maybe that was part of the frustration with Scott McLaughlin, is that he had dug himself a hole, maybe not him in particular, but the team that he had dug out of, to then have it thrown away when Will Power took him out. But I thought there was a lot of action. Maybe it was because of the boredom that was Iowa, and then going into Toronto, it was just a decent race, but it felt like a better race considering what we had to suffer through on back-to-back days at Iowa. So for me, I had it a 7.
I had it a 7. I'm begging in this hybrid era for there to be a true on-track pass for the lead, because pit cycles do not count in my book, and we're still waiting for that first on-track pass for the lead, and it does not sound good coming out of the break at the ovals in terms of passing. So we shall see, but I'm begging for that. Otherwise, I'd give it a higher score. Again, a 7. Listeners gave it a 6.8 average.
Well, everybody's pretty close.
Yeah, I think this was a solid race. Not a lot of action up front in the top 2. And I know people want to say, well, team orders. I don't think so. I just think Kirkwood didn't have an opportunity to make a move, and he wasn't going to throw away his race to try to make a move to get the lead.
I think if there were any team orders or even agreements between the two drivers, is like, hey, on restarts, let's not do anything stupid going into turn 1. I think maybe, if anything, that was the agreed upon strategy for those two, and then they'd race it and see what happens. So I don't know, there were team orders per se, but it was don't take each other out.
All right, we get to your tweets, thoughts, questions, and you took this poll from IndyCar fan David Lighting, and I thought it was a great poll. I agree with you on this. He said the Indianapolis 500 was an all-timer this year. The rest of the races have been lacking at best. Would you be willing to sacrifice the rest of the season for a banger of a 500? Would you prefer an average 500, but offset that with an awesome rest of the calendar? And go figure, the vote was split right down the middle, 50-50.
What are your opinions?
I would go with a banger 500 because that's the key thing in terms of getting eyeballs for the sport, for selling money, sponsors, for buzz. That trumps everything else, no matter what. And
finances of the series.
I would love it if, we had other races be competitive. But look, we've had this before, right? We didn't have a banger of a 500 in 2022. And we had, I would say, overall, a pretty entertaining season. But the 500 is what matters. And the last 2 500s have been bangers.
If the IndyCar series ever got to a point where they did not have to rely on the Indianapolis 500 as much as it does financially, then I could go the direction of saying all the other races are great and it's just an average 500. But the fact of the matter is, like you said, the Indianapolis 500 is so key in so many different ways, in terms of eyeballs, in terms of financials, in terms of team health and sponsors. And how many of these sponsors, if you just had a processional 500, would not be on the car for the 500 and beyond? It just too much is on the line in the Indianapolis 500, and that's why I had to vote Indy 500 has to be a banger.
And I think the reason why CART was successful is because they didn't need the Indy 500 was a marquee event, and they did need the Indy 500. Let's not kid ourselves.
Yeah,
because we saw how quickly things disintegrated. It took 5 years, which is probably longer than people thought. But you had the named drivers, and you had the manufacturers and the sponsor support. But look, CART was able to get equal billing at other events because of the personalities and the drivers. And I think IndyCar's getting there with some of the drivers and personalities, but they're nowhere near what they were, obviously, 30 years ago.
And CART even tried to replicate the Indianapolis 500.
We saw how that went.
It did not work well in Michigan.
This reply, and this is prior to Toronto, so keep that in mind. Skyscraper Tree 1 said, I don't remember a worse 3-race stretch than what we've just suffered. Heil Mike said, true dat. And then DC Soda said, absolutely easy answer. The Indy 500 is a race that's remembered forever. Great race at Mid-Ohio is remembered for maybe a week and a half. I think that sums it up pretty well.
Yeah, and I think maybe we'll get to this in a little bit, but you looked at the final lap and a half of the Xfinity race at the Speedway last Saturday, and I think I put it on Twitter, and you and I were talking about it. Yes, the cars look so slow, especially the Xfinity cars on the Speedway. But the last time we had an ending like that on an oval outside of Indianapolis, I mean, what?
Texas 2023.
But it just feels like the majority of our ovals have been pretty stagnant, and just a great finish at the Speedway. So I do think a lot of work needs to be done. There is one thing we'll get to in the mailbag that maybe we forgot about that we'll talk about here shortly in Racer Mailbag that doesn't hold a lot of promise for the remaining 4 ovals on the schedule.
This from Hickey 93. in my opinion, having a banger 500 is awesome for historical purposes, yes, but having trash races after ultimately harms the series. Having bangers all year is good for the average fan. And that goes back to are we putting the best foot forward with having Detroit after Indy? That's always the question, but it is what it is. As long as Roger owns the series, that's how it will be.
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with Hickey on this one, because if you have a boring 500, the average fan isn't tuning into Detroit and everything else.
True.
You have to have that hook, right?
Meanwhile, the series formerly known as Indy Lights, this from Racer.com, is considering a new entry structure that would limit the number of cars each team can field. This is a puzzling decision because, as someone pointed out on our replies here, they were lucky to get like 8, 9, 10 cars just a handful of years ago. So you're looking at it, and they've had 18 at most events. I think they've had over 20 at a couple. But you look at this, and you have a series that is finally thriving, despite the scholarship money being reduced and it being harder for drivers to actually get to IndyCar compared to how it was before. But you're at least getting the car count that I think you longed for so long, and now they're talking about limiting it. I think it's silly, and we'll get to the replies here.
But the reasoning for Mark Miles doesn't make sense.
No.
The quality over quantity. Okay,
but they have quality.
Yeah, I just
half the field is one team that's quality.
I think there's more depth in terms of racers that can win races at the lights level than the IndyCar level.
Well, I mean, it used to be in lights you'd have 2, maybe 3 drivers capable of doing anything. Right. And yes, you have your dominant drivers. I mean, Lewis Foster's dominated this championship, but you have several other drivers who can win races and be in contention.
I don't understand why, and this is coming from Mark Miles, that quality is more important than quantity in lights, but it's not more important in IndyCar. They want to tout how many full-time entries they have, and I will argue, and we'll get more into this with some comments by Zach Brown this past week or prior to Toronto's race, that why is quantity more important than quality and the top rung in IndyCar? Because we've mentioned it. You could trim 4 or 5 entries from the field and not lose a damn thing in IndyCar. But apparently that's not a priority, or that's not important. So what's the difference? I don't understand. Why is it one level is quantity over quality and the other one's quality over quantity?
Wouldn't you want quantity over quality in your feeder series?
Exactly.
Because you have more drivers to pull from in terms of developing talent that could eventually make it to IndyCar. Isn't that the goal? Whereas you want quality over quantity at your top series. I'm not saying we want 20 car grids. To me, 24 to 26 cars is the perfect amount of full-time entries at a race.
I'm kind of like at 23, 25 would be, even 22 to 24. If you trimmed right now the bottom 6 cars out of the field full time, you're not losing anything on track.
So if they limit the number of cars the teams can enter,
go from 10 to 3.
Yeah, 10 to 3, 10 to 4. I mean, you've cut your grid from 18 essentially to 12. Is that helping the series? I don't think so.
And this is not something that the teams have necessarily pushed either. I mean, Michael Andretti had some questionable comments about it, questioning the intent. HMD has expressed its frustration with this idea.
HMD just invested in a brand new shop in Brownsburg that they just opened up recently. And then now suddenly IndyCar's like, oh, yeah, by the way, we're going to limit your entries. Like, what's going on here?
I don't understand the reasoning why. And Mark Miles' comments thus far that I've seen make no sense. They don't make a sensible argument for why that should be a thing. So it's almost like in all the issues that IndyCar is going through, like, why do you even care? Why is this even a thing?
This is creating problems that don't exist.
Yeah, it's like you have plenty of other issues to address. Why are you tackling something that's not an issue?
All right. Replies on this. Daniel SCM 2004 said it's puzzling. Also concerning when half your grid is one team. Correct. More than half. But they had that when the field was half the size as well. FitJ 1983 said the originator of that idea needs ruthlessly fired. Also, Rock44 said, don't limit, just force leader circle teams to field an entry to be eligible. Well, that's the best way to fix lights, but
saying that for years.
Everyone's had that idea. Historic Hot Laps says probably looking to reduce Andretti domination. However, if no other team wants to field the cars, that's another issue. I'd be looking to return on investment for more teams to participate rather than limiting entries. And as you rightfully pointed out, HMD has 10 cars. Andretti has what, like three or four?
Or maybe like
plus,
3 full plus affiliated.
Plus 2 with Cape Motorsports, so they're affiliated. Also, Howard 2112 said, didn't this series have like 8 cars a few years ago? Correct.
Here's a conspiracy theory. Does IndyCar want to limit the amount of drivers in Indy Lights because the path for quote-unquote qualified drivers from Lights to IndyCar has become more difficult?
Yeah, I don't get it.
If they limit the amount of drivers that are in Lights, that's less drivers that can say the system, the ladder isn't working because I went all the way up and I couldn't get in IndyCar. Because that's been the frustrations for F2 drivers.
And that's why IndyCar is getting those F2 drivers. But then now suddenly Lights is becoming a closed off series in terms of promotions.
Yeah, and I think you to look at too is F2 has become every bit of a feeder series to IndyCar as Indy Lights has been.
Yes, which I would agree.
And I'm the thing too is like I don't care where the drivers come from. I just want them to be quality drivers that add depth and talent to the field. I don't care if they're coming from Lights. I don't care if they're coming from F2. I don't care if they're coming from supercars. I don't care if they're coming from MotoGP. I don't care where they're coming from. I don't care if they've only raced karts, but they come in and they're a great driver in IndyCar and develop into it. That's all I care about. I don't really care about where it comes from, but I do understand the investment that IndyCar makes into its series and Indy Lights and those teams. They want that natural pipeline, right? I don't care where the drivers come from. I just want good drivers in IndyCar.
Also, this kind of move, if it's implemented for next season, right on the cusp, when Lights is essentially going to have the greatest exposure they have ever had in our lifetimes, to my knowledge, with races being on FS1 or FS2 along with practice and qualifying. Is that correct? Or just the races?
I think
just the
races.
But either way, that's the best coverage they have had in years. I mean, it used to just be, you got the Freedom 100 on either NBC or NBC Sports Network back in the day, and that was really the only coverage they got outside of a streaming only kind of service. But this is a big deal. And as a lot of people rightfully pointed out over last weekend, if Xfinity can race on the oval, why can't Lights?
Or at the very least, IRP.
Yes, I think that would be a great addition.
And two, I really think not only that you mentioned the added visibility for the series entering next season on Fox networks and the visibility they'll have, but also we're potentially shaping up to be a great matchup, hopefully, between Jamie Chadwick and Miles Rowe for an Indy Lights championship next year. And who's to say those two drivers have seats, particularly Miles Rowe, if you limit entries? Because it's not like Miles Rowe brings a lot of money, and he's needed significant help in getting as far as he has in the ladder. So. And it's not like there's a bunch of empty side pods racing in Lights races either. I mean, that's one thing I do notice is I remember the days when hardly anybody had sponsors. Now most everybody has some sort of sponsorship on their car. I need more information from IndyCar on why this is even a talking point. I don't understand. Sometimes
it just feels like they're creating stuff to create stuff for no reason. And it's not like how it used to be where you had what driver that was seemingly in the series like forever. I mean, you're not getting those drivers anymore who are seemingly there.
Oh, and you had like one car teams, and stuff like that. You just don't really see that. You have a couple, but if the teams don't have a problem with it, like, why are we creating a problem if it's not there? And there were no quotes or anything from teams in Indy Lights that were saying the size of the fields was a problem.
Yeah. Last thing in the mailbag, poll question. What IndyCar-related activity will keep you occupied during the Olympics break? Nearly 74% of you said Prima driver predictions. We'll have more on that. 11% said other. Nearly 9.5% said counting days till Fox, and nearly 6% of you said hating on hybrids.
I'm glad that number wasn't higher.
I would agree. Unlimited Slip DF said, putting together my ride in the 25 Indy 500, sponsored by Oreos, M&M's, Snickers, and Nerds.
Powerful lineup, by the way.
BK Hickey will watch as many seconds as possible of the Olympics, so we'll be busy cheering on Team USA.
I watched a 3-meter springboard this morning.
How was that? I've caught glimpses when I've been at home, because I've mostly been at the hospital, but I've caught glimpses of stuff. I did watch some of the opening ceremonies, which was, it's always bizarre.
Yeah, it was bizarre to say the least. I didn't know that the opening ceremony, like the team of, or the Parade of Nations, was going to be on the Seine River.
I did know that.
I didn't, which I'm like, well, what do they do for the little countries? Like
they just combine boats or have small boats.
Gotcha. I thought they were just going to be canoes, like for
a little dinghy.
Kazakhstan comes by with just a little, like one of those paddle boats, you do with your feet.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So to each his own. We've already talked about this with winter and summer Olympics. We prefer the winter, but it's a well earned break for IndyCar teams for sure, and NASCAR teams because they're off for a couple weeks as well.
F1 this weekend, and then they have their summer break. So
they do. Is this the last time we'll see Sergio Perez in a Red Bull car this weekend at Spa?
I'm going to go with no.
Because it would create such chaos, I'm going to say yes.
Daniel SCM 2004 on the poll said charters and ownership sales. Yeah, we'll have plenty of that and news.
Yeah, we haven't heard a lot from charters lately. Remember they were supposed to finalize
be done by the 500.
Yeah, that didn't happen.
Lynn _IndyCar said other silly season, which includes Prima. Atlantic Cat 99 said sorting out and eventually posting my picks from Road America. Yeah, I know, in Toronto. And then Indy Rocks 23 said YouTube vids of 80s and 90s IndyCar oval races, please. So there you go.
Whatever you guys got to do to pass the time.
Yes, because it is. I think it won't be as slow as we expect it to be.
No, I don't think so. And it is a grind, not just for the teams, but for viewers like me. Like every weekend in the past 2 months, most weekends was some sort of IndyCar event. Going back to pre-500, right? I mean,
yeah.
I don't mind the break, I guess, is I don't have to be locked in every Friday, Saturday, Sunday to IndyCar with so much other stuff going on. And I didn't just have a child.
Yeah, I have a lot going on. And then we teased Zach Brown's comments. So he said we need to shift into quality versus quantity, like you said. He said, I don't think we need 27 cars. I think 20, 22, 24 great cars. I think we're focusing too much on the quantity. We need to find a better blend of quality versus quantity. Here's what's really happening here. Until IndyCar gets a new car, they're going to have this problem. That's the reality.
They are. There was something also in that Motorsport article that in my opinion is wrong by Zach Brown, as he pointed and said, well, look at the popularity of Formula One with tremendous technology and not very much passing, and look how popular it is. And kind of like saying, well, look what we could do in IndyCar. It's like, that doesn't work. You know why people tune into Formula One with limited passing? I mean, there's more now than there has been in the last 5-6 years, but it's because you have Ferrari and Mercedes and Alfa Romeo and Red Bull. And I mean, just it's a reason why McLaren.
Also, it's a global sport versus IndyCars and North American
sport with the who's who of auto manufacturers around the world. Okay, you can't say, well, look at all these people watching Formula One and they don't have much passing. That's a surface view. There's reasons why people watch, and that would not work in IndyCar. Not at all.
A few replies on this. Kojo617 said, top 24 qualify in all rounds minus the 500. Problem solved. Yeah, I'd be fine with that. Maybe 26. Hunter's Way, 67. 20 to 22 is not enough. 24 to 26 is perfect. Zach just wants less competition for him. Stop trying to turn IndyCar into F1. Next, I want to limit paddock access to drivers and teams. F that. Lynn _IndyCar says, we can start by eliminating McLaren because they're the most overrated team on the grid. That would take IndyCar to 24 cars. Of course, find Pato a ride. Zach needs to stay in F1 where he belongs. He's worn out his welcome, it seems.
You think? I love Zach.
Tyler _Allen. I guess that means he needs to eliminate a car then, right? I don't mind the size of the field. It's highest quality top to bottom it's ever been, even compared to the early 90s. I would agree with that aspect. Stealth 1014 agreed. Why did he hire Nolan Siegel? Not ready, just a number. Ouch. And then adds, personally, I think he's scared of more competition from pending new entrants. Maybe that's where
it doesn't strike me as Zach Brown is afraid of teams.
I wouldn't think so either.
I like Zach Brown. I think he says some stuff that's wrong, but that doesn't,
But at least he says stuff.
At least he says stuff. I mean, if every team owner was as outspoken as Zach Brown, a lot more things would happen in IndyCar on the good side, in my opinion. And here's my thing. We mentioned it about Indy Lights. So if we had an entry barrier of 3 cars in lights, why wouldn't we do it in IndyCar?
Well, I mean, they're setting that up essentially with the charter system. And there's rumors of, Ganassi farming out an entry to Meyer Shank because that will potentially be the new technical alliance partner.
But Andretti is grandfathered in, right? Or were they?
Well, they gave up their 4th.
Okay. But that's the thing. Why would we have a limited to 3 in lights, but not a limited to 3 in IndyCar? And I know, but part of my interest right now in Formula One, not just because Max doesn't run away with every race, is the Manufacturers Championship, which is exciting too. And I know we'll probably never get to a point in IndyCar, and people will say this is F1ification, but where every team has the same amount of cars entered, it does add a different dimension in terms of standings, and something to watch is when you have these constructor standings.
Well, but if you can't have Dick Simon entering like 8 cars.
That's right.
That's a problem.
What's the point?
News and notes time. Let's rattle through some silly season stuff. First off, the highlight has been Marshall Pruitt saying in this week's Racer.com mailbag, Rossi to Prima. That's all he said, but that is
And that was his prediction.
Latest.
Somebody asked him about his predictions for various things, and that was one of his predictions, Rossi to Prima. And there's rumor, depending on what you read, what time of the day you get on Twitter/X, Prima has signed this driver, Prima has signed that driver. There's nothing substantial. Prima saying they haven't signed anybody. It seems like an almost everyday thing. Can you remember a team entering the sport with so much talk about them? When's the last time we had? I mean, it's McLaren.
Yeah,
right?
It's McLaren, because here's the thing with McLaren, and then now with Prima, there's buzz because we don't know who the drivers are going to be. Usually when a team enters, we pretty much know they're either inheriting a team and they say, oh, this guy's going to be our driver. But remember, Schmidt, Peterson, and Arrow, they sacked Hinchcliffe after, 2019? Mm-hmm. And so we didn't have an idea of who would take over. So that's kind of been the intrigue. And then they had Pato O'Ward. We knew he'd get a spot. It went from him not having a ride in 2019 and then getting random spot duty races after the Harding thing fell apart, and then him getting an Andretti ride never materialized. They didn't have space. And then he went and did Super Formula in Japan, then failed to qualify for the 500. Then he runs a few other races, filling in at places, and then boom, he gets a full-time ride. He takes off. I think the intrigue for this is like McLaren because, A, it's a known team coming over from Europe, and they're going to invest a lot of money and a lot of resources.
And they're saying all the right things, and they're coming in. They're going to have 2 paid drivers. They're not looking for cash infusion, it sounds like, at this point.
But I'm sure they'd take it.
They would, but I don't think they're doing it at the expense of hiring the best possible drivers they can. If Rossi, for whatever reason, brought $1 million in funding, yeah, they'll definitely take it. But they're not going to hire the 5th place guy in lights because he brings a $4 or $5 million check.
Yeah, and there's a good article on Motorsport by Joey Barnes talking about Prima's plans and what they're doing. Really, they haven't signed any drivers. That's the big take.
Not officially. Have they had some handshake deals, maybe, potentially?
Possibly.
Maybe. Depends on who you is. Is it Logan Sargent? Is it Alexander Rossi? Is it Devlin DiFrancesco? Just every day seems like a different rumor out there.
Yes. Drivers we can eliminate. Mick Schumacher. He's ruled out a move to IndyCar for now, wants to return to F1. This isn't a surprise. Devlin DiFrancesco, we can say, is in the mix, but probably not at Prima. Hickey93 saying multiple sources told him that DeFrancesco will be returning to the grid for the 2025 IndyCar season, likely be coupled with multiple partners joining the ownership group of a current IndyCar team. I posted something, and a lot of people, I said, what is this team? Because I thought Coyne initially, because remember he was talking with Coyne going into this year, and for whatever reason, I think he didn't have full season budget, and Coyne opted not to do that. Wonder if he feels that's a mistake now.
Right?
I don't know. But yeah, Juncos is the pretty much the consensus that it will be Juncos. Canapino will be out.
Yeah, Canapino's done, right?
DeFrancesco will be in. Because Canapino's not in the leader circle.
Well,
if he finishes,
regardless if he finishes there or not, I think he's done.
I think he's done as well. So then there's that. Then we mentioned Rossi to Prima as Pruitt's prediction. Then you have Jaron Dimmendahl from the Netherlands, who covers a lot more in lights, but a few interesting tidbits that he has translated. So this this goes back basically a week from now, as we recorded on Saturday morning, July 27th. But Prima signed the first driver for 2025. This is post-Toronto. Ray Hall has already filled one of the two vacancies. So I would say that's Yuri Vips, right?
Yeah.
I would say Rossi to Prima. And then there will be a big change at Juncos Hollinger before 2025. I would say that's DeFrancesco. And then he followed that up with, as far as the seats available, where things stand, 7 open seats. 1 at Ray Hall, 1 at Prima, 1 at Shank, 2 at Ed Carpenter Racing, 2 at Coyne. I would say Foyt, in theory, there's openings, but I would say they keep who they have based on how things are.
I think Stingray Rob's gone.
You do?
Yeah. I think he's out. Do you think Rinus VK is racing somewhere else?
I think so.
Really?
I don't know where, but I think he's somewhere else.
Yeah.
And then this also, Robert Schwartzman could be evaluating a move to IndyCar. He is been in Formula E and F2, pretty
has he had a
well
test
regarded.
before? He's had at least one.
He's
test.
interested in Prima, so we'll see that from therace.com.
He's had at least one test, right, with an IndyCar team?
I can't remember. I know there's been interest before, but I can't remember if he had a test.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he has either, but I think it's a name that's been flying around for a couple years as maybe a outsider looking in, trying to get into the series.
Young guy. He's still just 24 years old. So there's definitely an opportunity, but
I didn't realize Toby Sowery was as old as he is. He's like 28.
I did not either. But Schwartzman's with Ferrari in WEC, and he's a test driver with Team Ferrari in F1. So that's where he's at the moment, but you don't want to be stuck as a test driver for that long.
No, test driver is exciting for a year, maybe 2. Same as reserve driver. You could get some FP1s, particularly late in the season, but if it never materializes into something after like 2 years, it's pretty pointless.
Then you have Logan Sargent calling out Marcus Ericsson.
This was fun.
Over comments that Ericsson made on a podcast relating to Sargent's relationship with Williams team principal James Voles, calling them completely untrue. Ericsson was speaking in Swedish on the Viaplay Formula One podcast, which Viaplay is like their sports TV channel, I believe, in Sweden, and said, I was also told this weekend by some American friends who know Sargent that he doesn't have fun in that team. This is translated, obviously. He thinks it's really hard. Apparently, he and James Voles don't even talk with each other anymore. They barely greet each other. It's completely cut off between them. Look, Logan Sargent's out at Williams at the end of this year.
If not sooner.
I don't think that is going to end well. But it's interesting to hey, Marcus Ericsson in the news. Get some pub. You have a little bit of interest. Never a bad thing. Also, Christian Lundgaard told Zach Brown that he has zero interest in F1. Thought that was interesting. Motorsport article on kind of a deep
zero
dive.
interest, but if a call came in, you're telling me you're not taking it?
Yeah, I would.
I understand not pursuing, which is good to know, but who knows?
A couple other quick items before we wrap up. Penske Entertainment, and PPG announced a contract extension, 5 years in length. This from Nathan Brown. Team sponsorship deals for NASCAR and IndyCar, presenting sponsor for the Brickyard 400. So that is locked in. Also, Someone sent this to Indy 44, but GM's Renaissance Center headquarters in Detroit could face demolition.
Yeah, I'd read a story a couple months ago that, well, GM's moving out of the RenCen.
Yes.
To go to another location for its HQ. They were going to keep some offices in the RenCen and then rent out space in the facility. I would imagine if they don't have a lot of suitors, they would potentially tear that down. I don't see that as equating into IndyCar moving back to Belle Isle.
No, I don't think so either.
And I hope they don't move back to Belle Isle. Belle Isle was very restrictive in terms of fans. I mean, you had to bus to and from the island. It didn't feel like what a street course should be in terms of a true event in the middle of a city. And people, I mean, Belle Isle was okay, but it wasn't an absolute banger of a race year after year after year. I think when you compare it to what we've seen at Detroit the last couple of years, yeah, if you don't like Crash Fest, then yeah, it's your bag. But it's not like it was that exciting. I don't see her move back to Belle Isle if the RenCen does go away.
I don't think so either. Also, Kyle Larson, after winning the Brickyard 400, said, "I love you, Indiana fans. I know you love me too. How about we come back next May and try to kiss the bricks in the Indy car?"
Hey,
Look, he has the contract, so I don't know why people are acting as if he's not coming back.
Well, I mean, is it a multi-year contract at his discretion? Like it could be 2024 and 2027?
Could be.
Potentially. That's kind of how I look at it. Did you watch any of the Brickyard?
I did not.
Seemed like to be a really good crowd, which you would expect after, 4 years away from the Oval, 3 years, whatever it was?
They estimated 70,000, and you have, I forget the percentage I was reading, but a high percentage of seats are undercover, and the weather was actually nice, but people want to be undercover on the main straight. That's just the reality.
For sure. Look, the health of the Brickyard 400 impacts IndyCar, okay, positively or negatively. So I'm rooting for the Brickyard 400. I'm glad it was a successful event, a successful return to the Oval. The package was better than what we've seen in previous years on the Oval in Cup. So we talked about the excitement at the end of the Xfinity race. So just remember that, IndyCar fans, and you're looking at the Brickyard, whatever. The success of that event is directly tied to the financials of not just the Speedway, but the IndyCar series.
And this from Indy 44 saying, "Did I just hear IndyCar tempo during gameplay from one of the announcers in EA Sports College Football 25? Apparently that is a thing."
Really?
So that's
like
cool.
The theme song?
No, just like during the game, during gameplay.
Like
an announcer said IndyCar tempo.
Oh.
So like set it as in they're going at a fast pace. Like, like the Oregon Ducks, and how they play at a fast pace.
I wonder if that's actual, like Oregon actually uses that, or is it like just the announcer said it?
The announcer said it, apparently. So that's cool. That's a cool feature. And John Force out of the hospital into outpatient care. So that's excellent news there. That's the latest update on that. All right, tweets of the week time, and we have several. First one, Aaron McLaren posted a photo, and it's Nolan Siegel pointing at Teo Porcher, who's also pointing at David Malukas, and they're all also pointing at a cardboard cutout of Callum Ilott.
Hysterical.
Outstanding, and apparently it was David Malukas' idea. Outstanding job by the social team. That's incredible, making light of a situation for some fun. Also this, Indy 44 posted in cockpit of Graham Rahal a screenshot and the Microsoft blue screen of death after the CrowdStrike issues a week ago that carried over if you're Delta Airlines. But on the steering wheel, just hilarious in cockpit. Scott McLaughlin posted this, and he posted his own meme of him clapping at Will Power. But he had several of these, and I think my favorite one was rain in person in 22A when the pilot lands the plane. I hate that. I hate when people do that.
Have you ever been? I don't know if I've ever been on a flight where someone...
I'm sure I certainly have.
Now, I've never been on a plane that ever had like any issues or anything. Not like serious issues, but like any type of mild turbulence or was late or whatever. But yeah, the people that clap, we can't have that.
Also, and this is not a tweet of the week entry, but worthwhile. Bubba Wallace was wearing a Thirsty Threes shirt.
You sent me that.
Yeah, this was
We'll see.
after he was, I think, doing a legend car race, finished in second, and he's wearing a Scott McLaughlin Thirsty 3 shirt.
How about that?
From the shop. So that's pretty cool. And apparently the shop is going to put those back in stock because I'm sure there's a lot of demand. And then our final tweet of the week. This one's brutal. Absolutely brutal from a listener. This from our Cherry. And this in regards to, guessing current team for Devlin DiFrancesco to form that partnership with. And it says, my son says it's Chip Ganassi Racing as settlement for killing his dog. And a
Hysterical.
George Costanza, was that wrong?
Should I not have done that?
That is brutal.
That is brutal and hysterical.
Absolutely brutal. All right, time for our random split error driver of the week.
All right, I can't remember if we did this guy. He's not on my master list. Maybe I've just forgot him. But we're going to talk about Zach Morioka. One and
Who?
done in the IRL in 2000. His Wikipedia page is very tiny. I can even just read it word for word. Okay, native from Sao Paulo, Brazil. He won the USAC Formula 4 2000 championship in 1997. In 2000, he competed in one IRL contest for Revista Motors TriStar Motorsports. It was at Texas. It was the season finale of 2000. Finished 15th. And that's it. Zach Morioka, that's all.
Kroger was the sponsor on the car, according to the picture.
Yes. So that was a season that had, 8 or 9 races? 2000?
9, yeah. And 2 of those would have been at Texas.
Yeah, 2 at Texas. I think that was the only one that had 2.
Mm-hmm.
But, just one and done with TriStar Motorsports. Had the Dallara Oldsmobile. Was finished 15th at Texas in that race. That race was won by... Do you remember?
Oh, I'm looking at it right now, so... But I'm surprised. Scott Goodyear.
Yeah, Scott Goodyear won that race in 2000, and that was it for Zach Morioka in the IRL. So
The Excite 500. You remember Excite? It was like a website.
I do, yes. So what did it do? What was it for?
Wasn't it like a search engine?
Yeah, I think it was back when you had multiple search engines.
Yes, it wasn't just Google.
Yeah, you had everybody competing with each other to try to be the search engine that Google eventually just took them all out. But yeah, Zach Morioka, one and done. The 2000 race 2 at Texas 2, finished 15th. This week's random split era driver of the week.
All right, that does it for us. For Justin Kinney, I'm Caleb Hatch. We'll be back next week to, I guess discuss the latest and greatest in IndyCar silly season news. I'm sure we'll have something come down because we'll hit August, and that's when a lot of these things really shift gears. So we'll be back next week here on New Track Record Podcast.